Hi, good afternoon. This is Mr. Franklin Explains Some Math. We're talking about solving some quadratic equations today. One of the types of quadratic equations that we look at is always going to be in the form of ax squared plus c. And hopefully you can see from looking at this that there is no b term in this. Ax squared plus bx plus c is the standard form of a quadratic equation, and here we're missing the bx term in the middle, or in other words, b is equal to 0, which gives us kind of a standard recipe for solving these, but there's a few tricky things, and sometimes you got to get it into the correct form. Let's say we're looking at an equation like, we make this big enough to see, like x squared minus 9 equals 0. Given that equation, the way that we would solve it might be to add 9 to both sides, giving us the new equation, x squared equals 9. Now here we've got x squared, which tells me that there's some number that when I multiply it by itself, the number is 9. And so I think about what that number would be, and maybe I don't know what the square root of 9 is. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides, and using a calculator, I would square root that number. I hope you know it's 3. And now we would know that x equals 3. But wait, there's more. There's a little bit. If we look at this graph right here, let's say that this is the graph of x squared, and we're looking for where it equals 9. Can you see that the point 3, 9 is on that graph? That means that when we put x equals 3 into the equation, we should get out 9, which is what we had, right? You put 3 into this equation, you get out 9. But there's another number, should be obvious from the graph at this point, that because of symmetry, if the point 3, 9 is on my graph of this parabola, then by symmetry, also -3 would be on there. And how the heck does that work? Well, if you think about it, 3 squared equals 9. Therefore, the square root of 9 is 3, right? But another number, and there's a reason I'm putting this in parentheses, another number like -3, when you square that, well, you also get 9. In other words, there are two answers. Whenever you take the square root of a number, usually in regular, ordinary, everyday math, if you're taking the square root of a number, you're only talking about the positive version of it. But you can see here when we're looking at parabolas, it's the positive and the negative. In other words, there's always two answers. That corresponds to the exponent in the equation, by the way. So let's take a look at a couple of examples of that. On this worksheet from page 511 to 512, number 1 from Core Plus Book 1, the blue one, we've got a couple of examples here that I can work through, and I am going to make my text bright green so that it's easier to see which parts of this that I'm doing. Not sure why I turned the box green instead of my text. Not exactly what I wanted to happen there. What just happened? I guess we're going with the black egg. So anyway, with x squared, if I take the square root of x squared what I should get is x, because the square root of a number is the number that when you multiply it by itself or square it, you get that number. Right now we're talking about x squared, and how do you get x squared? You take x times x. So the square root of x squared is just x. And the square root of 25 hopefully you know is 5. If you don't know the square root of a number, use a calculator. And what we saw was there are two answers, and it's always the symmetric answer. In other words, the same number, but with a different sign. So there's the answer to letter A, the two answers that we're looking for. And when we're talking about quadratics, when we're talking about parabolas, there's always two answers that we're looking for. In part B, what we've got to do is say that x equals, again, the square root, but this time it's the square root of 12. What the heck is the square root of 12? Well, I've got a calculator over here. I don't know the square root of 12 off the top of my head, but I'm going to use a calculator. This is the one that Google provides. And when I do square root of 12, I see that the answer is 3.46. I've rounded off a little bit because I only want the first two decimal places. And my answer is 3.46, or it's negative 3.46. Hopefully that makes sense. Use a calculator, round off to two decimal places unless otherwise stated. I'm not going to do every one of these, but I do want to highlight a couple of special cases. Here in part C, the x squared isn't by itself yet. So what we've got to do is divide both sides by 5. And whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So in order to get x squared by itself, I have to divide by 5. And whatever I do to one side, I'm going to also do to the other side. So 60 divided by 5 is 12. And now we've conveniently got a very familiar problem. And this should equal, when we take the square root of both sides, we're going to get the square root of 12, or the negative square root of 12. Same answer as in problem B, conveniently. There are some other situations that can come up, and hopefully if you take a little time and think about it and work through these problems, you'll figure them out. Part F, I do want to highlight one of the things, and you may or may not know it, but you can't take the square root of a negative number. Like, for example, in the previous problem, if I had tried to take the square root of, say, negative 12, I get an error. Another way to think about that same thing is what two numbers, or what number when I square it would give me a negative number? Well, we know that a negative times a negative is a positive, and a positive times a positive is a negative. There's no way to get two numbers and square them and get a positive. Sorry, and get a negative. You always get a positive. There's a couple of steps here in part F, of course, that having that 75 there causes me some trouble. So I'm going to subtract 75 from both sides. And that's going to leave me with 5x squared equals, let's see, 60 minus 75, that's negative 15. And when I want to get x squared by itself, what I have to do is, of course, divide both sides of It's on the next page. That's why it disappeared. What I have to do is divide both sides by 5. Should be easy enough. And negative 15 when I divide it by 5. Now I've got x squared equals negative 3. And now I'm stuck. You might have noticed before this that I was going to get stuck. But now I'm definitely stuck. When your problem comes down to x squared equals negative 3, there's nothing you can do because you can't square root a negative number. That statement is not 100% true, but I don't think we're going to have to worry about it in high school math. It might come up, but for now, don't worry about it. Just know that the rule is you cannot square root a negative number. So thank you. I hope that this helped get through this type of problem. There's a few more here to try on your own, and there will be an assessment following this up in class. Thank you very much.